good evening and good day to everyone. I'm glad that we are back here on Thursday. Usually our webinars start at 7 p.m., but on Tuesdays. But today we are happy to have a special guest. As you can see her right here, Professor Joyce Harper has joined us, and I'm very, very excited to have you here tonight. I hope you had a nice evening already and are, ready to present this particular topic. I'm sure this is one of the topics that you are feeling very comfortable with, right, Dr. Joy? So glad that you are here. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening.
Thank you so much indeed. And just so before we begin, of course, remember that Professor Joyce Harper is going to talk about fertility, understanding your fertility, and she's definitely an expert, and she will be happy to answer some of your questions. But also remember that she might have some questions for you. So I would like you to be interactive. Just type anything in the chat, and I'm sure it's going to be more interesting for everyone. And I think that it's important to hear what Professor Joyce has prepared already. And it's amazing to have you, simply because I've been seeing some of your stuff, and of course it's always inspiring. And I think that even though this particular topic seems like it's the easiest one, we might be surprised sometimes. So I'm glad that we are actually going to talk about this tonight. And as you know, we will start with Professor Harper presentation, but afterwards, your favorite part, Q&A, will be, so you will have a chance to ask any questions you might have. Don't hesitate, okay? This is your time. We are here for you, as you know, and we are really happy that we are able to help you out if it's just a webinar, and I'm very happy that we are able to do that. So I think that we can start with the presentation. Professor Harper, are you also ready to begin? And thank you already for replying, Selma. It's good to see you. I know that there are many different from different places. So not only Europe, I know that some of you are from US, etc. So thank you so much for joining. And I believe that we can go ahead, right?
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed.
It's a real pleasure to be here. And so I lead something called the International Fertility Education Initiative. And we are a relatively new initiative, which we should have set up many years ago. We're experts that have been educating and doing research in the field of fertility education and fertility awareness. And we think it's really important that we make sure we deliver fertility education to everybody. It's something that it's very unlikely that you've learned about during your formal education. So what we often hear patients say is, why didn't anyone tell me this before? And we don't really want them to do that. We want them to know this right at the beginning. So I've always been an educator. And back in the 80s, when I started working in fertility treatment and worked as a clinical embryologist, I wanted to write a book mainly for women, but about your fertile years, about your reproductive health. I don't know where life goes, but I'm sure you know it goes very quickly. And I actually published the book last year. So here's my latest book. It's called Your Fertile Years. And it's what I think you need to know so you can make informed decisions about your reproductive life. And we are also now offering reproductive health education at work. So my team goes into the workplace and delivers information, really everything that I've written in the book, but we make a very interactive workshop for people in their workplace. And also the main part of what I'm going to say today, I've also been delivering in schools in the UK. It's really important. Again, you'll see that it's highly unlikely that the topics I'm going to talk about have been discussed in any depth within schools. At schools, we teach our young people how not to get pregnant and how not to get a sexually transmitted infection, but not to understand their fertility and not to look after their reproductive health. So what I'm going to share to you today, as you said, is a talk that I give many, many times. It's a short version. It's a 30-minute version. I do a lot longer versions. You'll see there's so much to go into and so much more depth to go into. So today I'm just going to really be giving you an outline of some of these important topics. So what I am going to cover is a little bit about the menstrual cycle. And I know for many of you, you're people that are going through IVF, but there's some important things about the menstrual cycle that I think it's always good to take stock of and to remember. I'm just going to very briefly talk about fertility and infertility. I know that you have had a lot of lectures and webinars about IVF treatment, etc. So I know you've covered that in lots of depth. But I'm also going to just briefly talk about the menopause. All women, almost all women, are going to go through the menopause in their life. And there's really some important information that you need to know and understand before you reach that time. Now, my talk is relevant whether you want children or not. I think it's really important to understand your fertility. If you're sexually active, you're going to spend your reproductive years either trying not to get pregnant or trying to get pregnant. And I know people listening now are probably trying to get pregnant, but I think it's really useful to know this information. And it's very, very important to also think about the LGBTQ plus community. They may want to have children. Many of them do want to have children. So it's important that we include education that is very inclusive of everybody. So I will go through issues that relate specifically to them through my talk. So let's start with the menstrual cycle. Now, you may have done a little bit of this at school, and if you're going through IVF, you will know about these hormones and you'll know really well about them. But I just think it's good to always revise them, and so you really understand what's happening in the normal menstrual cycle. So normally, I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the 28-day cycle, but we learn that there's a 28-day cycle and you ovulate around about day 14. And I'm going to show how that's not strictly true in my next slide. But first, the hormones. So we have estrogen and progesterone, and estrogen will rise as the follicle that's growing the egg rises. So if you're going through IVF, you'll have lots of follicles growing. They'll be producing lots of estrogen. So that's why you'll sometimes have your estrogen checked. And obviously on your ultrasound, they will measure how big those follicles are getting. And the progesterone, I'm sure you're aware, the progesterone here is preparing the womb for implantation. And if no implantation happens, then everything will go down. And FSH, again, you all know, is stimulating the follicle and the egg to start growing and produce estrogen and progesterone. And then we've got luteinizing hormone in the middle, which we mimic with the late night injection to do the final maturation of the eggs. But this is how it would happen in a natural cycle, hopefully. So, as I said, I've been going into schools and giving talks, and I have been asking young girls. So this was a slide that I did just last week. So in the UK, years 10 and 12 are aged from 15 to 17. And normally I do my this lecture to a mixed class. But this year, the school asked me specifically if I would go through some specific women's health issues just with the female class, which I did. I was a little bit reluctant, but I did. So what I did for the first time was I asked them, do you have any issues with your periods, such as pain, irregular periods, or heavy periods, etc.? And normally when I give a talk, I don't like just talking at the audience. I talk with the audience and get them very integrated. So I use a platform where they can write anonymous comments to the question that I pose. And I had 245 of the audience write comments within these two lectures that I gave. And this is one of the slides. And I just wanted to highlight here, pain to the point I used to collapse, a bit of pain, but not many issues. Back pain, intense pain that I can't move sometimes. Painful first 2 days, very heavy and painful with cramps and headaches. Heavy usually lasts for 10 days. So these are young girls that are dealing with very, very difficult periods at a young age. And I really, really felt for them. And I think it's just so important. So if I was doing Mentimeter, I'd ask you to do this online, but I'm just going to ask you today on this webinar to put it in the chat. And when I read out any comments, I won't read out your names. I'll just read out any comments. So I just wondered, in your life, have any of you had real issues with your periods? Have you had painful periods, irregular and heavy periods that you've had to deal with? So as I said, I really like getting the audience engaged. So if you wanted to share anything, please put that in the chat and just let us know about any issues you've had with your period. I haven't had any comments yet, but I'll keep an eye on it. Painful periods sometimes, but not always. I think women generally put up with so much, and we hear people say, oh, it's a woman's issue. You just have to put up with these things. So someone's had irregular periods, sometimes someone's had painful periods, but pretty regular. And I'm going to talk about endometriosis and PCOS just very briefly, but being very aware that if I've got an audience of 250 or so girls, that's quite a large number in that audience that are going to have issues such as PCOS and endometriosis as well. So there's some important things for us to think about. So feel free at any time to write any comments in. I'm keeping an eye on it. So the menstrual cycle, the two key events of our menstrual cycle are our period and ovulation, and which is our fertile window. And many years ago, when I was writing the book, I was reading lots and lots of papers on all the different topics that I was preparing for my book. So what I did is I went back and I looked at the original papers where we had got this idea, the textbook idea, that women have a 28-day cycle and ovulation on day 14. And I was amazed when I got to these papers that they were very small studies. Some of them were just on 100 women. They were all on women that had very normal BMIs. They obviously didn't take into account race as we consider now. These studies were very, very old. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the apps that we can use to monitor our menstrual cycle and our periods and ovulation. And one of these apps is an app called Natural Cycles, which can be used as a contraceptive app or as a plan of pregnancy app. And this app, it monitors the women's period. So when they have a period, they put it in the app so the app can learn about their menstrual cycles. But it also measures basal body temperature. And basal body temperature is what we call a marker of ovulation. It slightly rises on the day you ovulate. So I knew that Natural Cycles had literally millions, what we call big data of women's menstrual cycles. So I went to them a few years ago and I said, can we have a look at the characteristics of these menstrual cycles? And these papers that I show you, they're all open access. So if you just put the title into a search engine, you will get to the paper and you'll be able to read the paper and you can read more details. And we try and make the papers as accessible as possible. So with this research, looking at over 600,000 menstrual cycles, we found that only 13% of the cycles that we analysed were actually 28 days. And the vast majority, 65%, were 25 to 30 days. And so this is sort of the first take-home message, that if a woman's not having a 28-day cycle, she doesn't need to think there's something wrong. And I think that's very important, especially to get through to young women. But really important is that the ovulation day was actually, on average, day 17. And there's been other studies looking at different sets of big data that have shown a very similar result between day 16 and 17, that this is the day that ovulation happens, not day 14. So this is something we've really, really got to be aware of. And we need to really, really rewrite the textbooks when we are thinking of ovulation. So just a little bit, as I said, about polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's 1 in 10 women, as is endometriosis. And obviously, these are the symptoms here. And it leads to infertility. But when I'm giving this talk in schools, thinking of all the other things that can really affect them, including mood swings and irritability. And this is a hormone imbalance, especially they have raised testosterone. So this can lead to irregular cycles, irregular periods, but also these other symptoms. And it's really important to know this sooner rather than later, so that there are treatments that can be done to help people with polycystic ovarian syndrome. And unfortunately, normally a woman will only click that she's got this when she's trying to get pregnant. So it's really good if we can try and identify this sooner rather than later and deal with some of these symptoms. So endometriosis, 1 in 10 women, as I said, 14% of infertile women have endometriosis. And you're probably a very educated audience, so you probably already know that this is tissue from the womb, which is found outside the womb. And during your period, these bleed, and they bleed into these other areas and create a huge amount of pain. And as well as these symptoms here, can lead to depression and physical, sexual, psychological, and social well-being issues. And in the long term can cause scar tissue. And someone's written in the chat, does painful period mean I have endometriosis or not necessarily? So not necessarily. There are checks that need to be done. It could be, but it's really important. My message to everybody is that if you feel that the pain in your period is not acceptable, and you know, don't suffer in silence, please go and see your doctor, and ideally be referred to a gynecologist as soon as you can. Again, there are treatments for this, and leaving it and long term, as I said, can cause scar tissue and can lead to higher levels of infertility. So there are treatments available, and it's best to go and see your gynecologist as soon as you can. And women, as I said, should not be suffering in silence. So I want to talk to you about some research I've been doing on what we call femtech. And femtech is technology for women's health. It's mainly digital technology, but not necessarily. There are other non-digital technologies that women use for their health. But I'm going to talk about my work on looking at apps to monitor the menstrual cycle. And there are 2 main types of apps. There are period tracker apps or fertility apps. So we have recently published a survey. This is my student, Anna, who worked on this with me. We did a survey of women who were using apps, period tracker apps, and we wanted to know their attitudes, their ovulation prediction, and the accuracy of the apps in predicting their period start dates and what they felt about this, if their period was earlier or later than the app said. So again, read that paper if you want to find out some more information. But these apps are very popular with young people. Again, when I go into schools, I ask them if they're using an app, and well over half of the students will be using an app, a period tracker app, to monitor their cycles. So next question to you. Do any of you use an app, either for fertility or just to monitor your period? And you can just say yes or no. And if you do use one, you know, are you finding it useful? Does it normally get your menstrual cycle right? So we've got a couple of yeses and a no. Yes, another yes. So I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a scientist, but my clinical friends tell me in the gynecology department that normally when women come in, they bring their app and say, yes, this is the history of my period. And that's a really good record to have, to know how regular your cycles are, to know when your period's been coming. So I think it's really good. And someone said they've got two different apps. So yeah, they're really very common. So we asked the women in our survey, does the app accurately predict the start of your period? And if we look here, the biggest response was most of the time it got it right. Only a few said always got it right. There was a few less thankfully that said it never got it right. Some said rarely, and some said about 50-50. So this is important because I think especially young people think, oh, the app's not getting it right. There must be something wrong with me, not with the app. but there are many, many things that can affect when your period comes. But we can go into that if you've got any questions. But yeah, so someone said they use Flow, but it's not usually off by a day or so. There are, as I said, there are so many things that can affect when your period arrives that it's not surprising that it doesn't get it right. We're individuals. We're not an app. And so, you know, how you're feeling, if you're feeling depressed, if you're stressed, if you've been a bit under the weather, you know, and just even if you're feeling great, your period will normally oscillate around about 28 days, but not necessarily at that. Right, someone's just asked an excellent question. Not sure if ovulation days is accurate. I'm so glad you've asked that, because I'm going to now talk about that in a moment. The next slide will show that. The best thing about using the app, they said the highest answer was to know when my period is arriving, followed by helping me understand my body. And the third answer was to know when I am ovulating. So my next really important message to you is that if your app is only looking at your calendar, your dates of your menstrual cycle, almost all of the apps tell you the day you're ovulating. It is a wild guess. The problem is, again, we've done some research on this. The date they give you is probably going to be just 14 days from the start of your period. Now, if you have a shorter cycle or a longer cycle, it could be way, way away from 14 days. But even if you have a 28-day cycle, as I said, it's going to be nearer day 16 to day 17. So they're using the old data, the old historic data, and what they need to start doing now is changing this. But even if they use day 16, it's a very wild estimate. We've already said the day you have your period varies. Well, the day you ovulate will also really vary. So remember I said natural cycles use the basal body temperature, and that's what we call a marker of ovulation. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment when I talk about the fertility. So you are right. The day of ovulation, if it's just looking at dates, is not accurate. And that really has been a worry to me. And I first started this work on the apps because my master's students told me that their app was telling them that they were ovulating. And I said, before I even did any of this research, I said, how can it do that if it's just looking at your dates? How can it know the day you're ovulating? I'm someone that's been through 7 years of fertility treatment, and I can remember monitoring my ovulation day every month, and it does really, really vary. So let's talk about that now. Let's talk about fertility. So to make a baby, I think you probably all know that we need an egg, we need some sperm, and we need a womb. Now, women have about 500 menstrual cycles, give or take a little bit. We have about 500 cycles in our lifetime. And I'm sure you know, we normally ovulate 1 egg per month. So that's about 500 eggs. And I'm going to explain to you in a moment how it's not just the quantity of the egg, but the quality of the egg is really important as well. And the guys produce about 100 million sperm every time they ejaculate. That's just very sort of average. They normally ejaculate about 2 mils of sperm, and the sort of average count is about 50 million sperm per milliliter. So that's about 100 million sperm. There'll be some that will be higher, some that will be lower. We only need one, but they produce a lot of sperm. And obviously we need the womb. Now, I'm sure you're aware there can be problems with the womb. So we may need a surrogate. There can be problems with the sperm. We may need a sperm donor, and there can be problems with the egg. We may need an egg donor. So if we go back to our hormones, whether you're trying to get pregnant or not get pregnant, the most important time is ovulation and our fertile window. That's the time when you've got to be thinking about that, no matter what you're trying to do. So the fertile window is actually 6 days in your menstrual cycle. It's the 5 days before ovulation, and that's because sperm can survive for about 5 days in the female genital tract. And it's also the day of ovulation. And it's the day of ovulation because that's when the egg's released and it obviously can be fertilized, but it's only viable for about 24 hours. So if we want to look at ovulation, we really shouldn't be looking at dates. So I put a big cross through just looking at dates. So whether we're using an app, a diary, however we're doing it, it's really not accurate. There's too many factors that can affect this. So I mentioned already basal body temperature. It rises very slightly around on the day of ovulation. You can check your cervical mucus, but you really need to be trained how to do this. And for some women, sort of getting involved with their mucus and things is not something they feel that comfortable with. And a really easy way is to use an ovulation stick, which measures luteinizing hormone. Remember, the one that rises, and it rises about 24 to 40 hours before ovulation. So when you do your late night injection, when you're having your IVF, it's basically equivalent to having that surge of luteinizing hormone. It's involved with the final maturation of the egg. And sorry about the banging. I've got teenagers here they've just finished their exams, so they're sort of getting ready to go out. But yes, so the luteinizing hormone, you will have the equivalent to that in your late night injection, and it does the final maturation of the eggs. And you have to have your egg collection about 36 hours later. If you left it to 40 hours, you would ovulate, and the eggs would become ovulated. So luteinizing hormone is a really easy way to do it. So what we wanted to do were look at the apps that marketed themselves as fertility apps. So these are really important for anyone trying to get pregnant, because if you're trying to get pregnant, the most important thing you're measuring on your app is ovulation. So you do not want it just to be the date, because if it's just the date, as I said, it's going to be a bit of a wild guess. And we looked at these. This is our paper. It's just been shortlisted for an award for the most popular paper in this journal called RBM Online last year. And this paper, we showed that over half of the apps only looked at dates, which is really not good to call yourself a fertility app. I don't look at dates. Only 39% looked at dates and basal body temperature. 5% looked at dates and mucus, and 1% looked at dates and luteinizing hormone. And again, we did another study here about period tracker apps and ovulation. Again, you can read that. It's a little bit more high tech. But our take-home message is that the ovulation day is very varied, and monitoring dates only is inaccurate. So if you want to look at your fertility, you really need to measure a marker of ovulation. So this is a rather depressing slide, unfortunately, but it's important to know, and this is the one most women will say to us, why didn't anyone tell me this before? So it's a really key piece of information. We're trying to find a positive way of presenting this information without causing offense or upset in women, but it's really hard to understand that unfortunately for women, that whereas men are mostly fertile from puberty to death, mostly, not all of them, and there is some decrease and there are some other issues, but I'm just doing a big generalization here. I always get the people in the audience to shout out some older men over 55, 60, who they know have become fathers. They always say Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. Older people will think of famous pop stars and actors, but the young people don't know who they are. So, but female fertility has, as I'm sure you all know, a limited lifespan. And we actually become infertile about 8 to 10 years before we go through the menopause. And I'll come on to that next. And we have a limited lifespan. So our fertile years are from puberty to about, as I said, 8 years before the menopause. And it's due to the quantity and the quality of our eggs. So females are born with all of the eggs we are going to have. We have about 1 to 2 million potential eggs when we're born. But by puberty, most of those have died. And we're down to about 400,000 eggs at puberty. They just die and they get reabsorbed. Now, remember, we had about 500 menstrual cycles in our reproductive life. So if you do the maths there, you can work out that we're losing up to So about 500 to 1,000 eggs every month. So we ovulate one, but the others just die. So even if you're on any hormonal contraception, don't think, oh, it's okay, I'm saving my eggs because I'm not ovulating. You're only saving one. The others, the majority will all die. And then people worry about IVF treatment and the drugs, the fact that they might have 20 follicles or 10 follicles. They worry about that they'll go through the menopause earlier. But again, it's just 10 or 20 out of the 1,000 you could possibly have lost. And then the quality, of the eggs are also affected as we move away from puberty. The eggs have the chromosomes in a very fragile state, and the chromosomes can become confused. And this leads to an increased risk of miscarriage, an increased risk of a chromosomally abnormal child, and a decreased chance of conception. So sometimes people talk about the AMH test, the anti-Müllerian hormone test, but the AMH test only looks at the quantity of the eggs. It doesn't look at the quality. And this graph is from my book, and it clearly shows you age along the bottom, and the chance of getting pregnant. Your fertility goes down as you get older. By 45, for the majority of people, it's going to have gone. And chance of miscarriage goes up because of the chromosome abnormalities, mainly because of the chromosome abnormalities. And the really important age we talk about in reproductive health is age 35. So age 35 is when we, for most women, they will start to be losing their fertility. So just a couple of questions in the chat. I'll just take them now. Are the LH test strips accurate, or what is the most sure method to tell when we ovulate? I feel everyone will have their own view. For me, I think the LH strips, it depends. There'll be different makes, and I haven't looked at all the different makes or validated them. But the LH strips to me are going to be they should be pretty accurate. But I know there are some very cheap ones you can buy. I don't know how good they are. But there are brands that have been around for decades that produce a really good product. So I think go for one of the brands that are really good. And when you know each month roughly when you're going to be ovulating for you, then you only need to use a few. So the first few months you might have to use quite a lot to check when you're ovulating. But as you get used to it, you could just use a few of them around the right time. And then another question, does going through IVF for repeated rounds reduce the best eggs as time and rounds progress? No, there's no evidence for that. As I said, you would lose up to 1,000 each month anyway. In IVF, we think it's a lot if you've produced 30 eggs. That's such a small number that these are normally going to die anyway. And the quality, I wish we had the answers for the quality, but we just don't. So this is a really important graph. The mean age of women at their first birth. This is some data from the OECD. And this has got countries along the bottom. And then up here, it's got the age. And you can see that here, it goes to age 34. And remember, I said age 35 is the age we really need to worry about when we feel that for many women, they'll start to have fertility problems and decrease their fertility. And this graph shows you that the black diamonds are from 1970. The white diamonds are from 1995 and the blue bars are from 2017. And you can see here how in almost every country, the mean age of women at their first birth has gone up. And you can see here, if we go across from age 30, you can see that over half of them, the mean age of their first birth is actually over the age of 30. And we've done many studies on asking men and women what age they'd ideally like to have their first child, and many of them say 30. So I'd like to ask you, and this may have been an age in the past. So in our surveys, they've been able to write a year in the past. What age would you ideally like to have started your family? I've actually had a baby. So you can write that in the chat. And I'll just read this next question. I read a study that suggested chromosome abnormalities are only responsible for 5% of the miscarriages and immune issues are primarily the cause. What is your feedback on this? I've not seen that 5% at all. When I give this talk to a longer talk, I have a table that shows the number of miscarriages that are due to chromosome abnormalities by age. Certainly, if you're 16, the chance is low. I even don't think in a 16-year-old it's as low as 5%. I'm not sure. I'd have to go and check the data. But once you get over 35 and over 40 and over 45, the chance of the chromosome abnormalities being responsible for your miscarriage is hugely increased. So I would have to have a look at that paper. I think they were probably looking at a subgroup of people and not looking at the general population. It's certainly very high. It's one of the main causes of miscarriage. So someone said that they ideally wanted to start their family at 35. And someone's asked, is there any way in which the quality of eggs can be tested? I'm 43 and my AMH is 10.3. Unfortunately not. There is a method to check chromosomes of eggs and embryos, but it's very, very complicated. We can maybe talk about that a little bit more later. And one issue at 43 is you might not get that many eggs. And in my view, to start doing these procedures where you start checking the chromosomes has issues. But again, we can talk about that. So I'll just come back to the next question in a minute. I'll just do a couple more slides. So this is some results from one of our surveys. This is my student, Sebastian. We did a survey of women to ask them their attitudes and knowledge about having children. And this is a graph that I asked at a talk. I asked the audience, what age would you like children? And most do say around about the age of 30, give or take. And they did in our survey, and mainly because they're developing their career. The second most common reason was, I am ready to have children now, but most of them don't have a partner who's ready to have children. And that's a whole other issue about the men being ready as well. So what we call modern families are the non-traditional family. So a traditional family would be a man and a woman, and the non-traditional families are becoming much more common now. So we can help single women and same-sex female couples have children. They probably, hopefully have eggs and a womb, but they need some sperm, which they ideally get from a fertility clinic. And I've done research looking at other ways of getting sperm. Single men and same-sex male couples are increasingly having children now. They normally hopefully have the sperm, but they need eggs and a womb. So it's a little bit more complicated, but we can certainly help them. And fertility for people who do not align or identify as their sex assigned at birth. So they may be non-binary or maybe transitioning. They need an egg, a sperm and a womb, just as we would. But it's especially important if they're medically transitioning. So if they're medically transitioning, this may be hormonal or it may be surgery. And chances are those methods are going to make them infertile. So AFAB is assigned female at birth and AMAB is assigned male at birth. So for assigned female at birth, if they want, they can freeze their eggs. They may or may not wish to keep having periods. It's very, very individual. And they may or may not wish to keep their womb. And if they keep their womb, they may or may not wish to carry a pregnancy. It's absolutely up to them. And everyone will have different views on this. There's one worrying thing is that some transgender men who they're taking testosterone and they're not having periods, some of them are getting pregnant if they're having intercourse, penis-vagina intercourse. They can still get pregnant, and there's been a growing number of reports about transgender men who gave birth after surprise pregnancy. So there's a lot to consider here, and they really need to get specialist advice on this. And if they're assigned male at birth, we can obviously freeze their sperm. So it depends on them, depends on their partner, depends on their views, but we need to make sure that they know this information. So infertility, I'm not going to say much. I know you've had a lot. Really, you have to have intercourse around your fertile window. And if you do, most people should be pregnant after 6 months. And if you're not pregnant within a year, then you are classed as infertile. And what we recommend in the International Fertility Education Initiative is that for people over 35, only leave it 6 months. Don't wait for a year. Leave it 6 months, and then it's up to you, but maybe start getting some tests. And I'm sure you're aware of these sorts of data. This is data from the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority in the UK. And it is all about the egg. So this is patients using their own eggs and the success rates. The chance of this working in your 40s is just a few percent. It's 96% chance of not working. But if you use a donor egg from someone under 35, so this is our under 35s here, we'll see this then becomes pretty much equal. So it is all about the egg. The egg's so important. And egg freezing, again, I could give a whole lecture about egg freezing. I always call it plan B, not plan A. I think we have to understand that it's expensive. You really need multiple rounds. And what's really worrying is no guarantee. We unfortunately don't have a lot of data on the success of this procedure yet. Very few people have come back, relatively few people have come back to use their eggs. And there are regulations in different countries. In the UK currently, you can only store your eggs for 10 years. We hope this is going to change, but it is at the moment 10 years. So I would worry, these are my students a few years ago at graduation. I would really worry if at graduation we march them off to the fertility clinic and get their eggs frozen. With the International Fertility Education Initiative, we're trying to keep people out of the fertility clinic and encourage knowledge and the ability to conceive naturally. And here we would be taking people who don't need fertility treatment into the clinic. So it makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable. And just to finish off, just a little bit about the menopause. Again, if I had more time, I would ask you for some words about the menopause. I recently did a UK lecture series called Sex in 3 Cities, and I asked the audience to tell me the words they use to associate with the menopause. There's lots of negative words here. It's very hard to find a positive word. I think the menopause, post-menopause, shall I say, is great news. There's no more menstrual cycle, no more periods, no more premenstrual syndrome, and no more mood swings, and no more need for contraception. And I'm not alone. I've done podcasts with many people, such as Magnificent Midlife, Radiant Menopause, Happy Menopause. I absolutely agree that transition through the menopause can be really difficult. But we, again, have done lots of research on this. This paper's coming out hopefully next week. Next week, I give the British Menopause Society annual lecture called Demystifying the Menopause. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm hoping this paper will come out the same day. And then we're going to get a lot of, I've already got a lot of journalists who have read the paper and are very, very interested in writing it up. So we did a lot of research in this. This is just one of the studies from the studies we've been doing. We asked women before the age of 40, how informed did you feel about the menopause? And unfortunately, the majority felt not informed at all. And the next one was some knowledge. And women should not be reaching this stage of their life not understanding what the menopause is. And this is Sam here who helped me with this research. This is the age women go through the menopause. And when we say go through the menopause, this means they've gone for 1 year without having a period. And remember, they're going to lose their fertility about 8 to 10 years before that. So the average age in the UK that women are postmenopausal is age 51. But you can see this starts in your late 30s. So it's important that at these stages, we have educated women about the symptoms and treatments available for the menopause. So they go into this really with knowledge. So this is a question we asked them about their symptoms. We had a very long list of 52 symptoms, and we asked them if they had any of these. And the most common were symptoms that would really affect their performance and motivation in their life and work. Irritability, poor concentration, poor memory, brain fog. I'll let you read the rest. So this is really worrying, and we want to be sure that women understand this. Lots of them, what happens is they have these symptoms, not realizing, they always think, I'm too young to be going through the menopause. So they put it down to issues with their life or their partner or their job or their family or their friends. And they can get even more depressed and low about this because they feel that they're sort of going crazy and life's terrible. And they don't realize that it's their hormones. So yeah, lots to think about then. So in conclusion, I really feel that we need to ensure that everyone is educated about everything I've just told you about, from the menstrual cycle to the menopause. This is me giving a talk in one of the schools. I've done many over the last year, and this is my team of reproductive health at work. And we're going into companies to offer them education, much more details about what I've talked about today and how this can affect them in the workplace. And there are things that we really need to ensure are available in every working environment to make women have an easier time as possible. So these are my teams. This is my research team. This is my menopause team. And I'm also a cold water swimmer. This is a team we're doing a study at the moment that's live, asking women if they feel cold water swimming helps their menstrual and menopause symptoms. So far looking very positive. And when we do these surveys, it's traditionally, not just mine, but traditionally they're normally completed by highly educated, middle class white people. And so it's really important to listen to other narratives from other communities. So I'm working with this excellent group of women who have a big social media following in the Black community. And we're just waiting for the ethics approval to do our menopause survey in the Black community, which I think is really, really important. And then we need to repeat that in the Asian community and also for people who are transitioning. So this is my contact. This is my last slide. I do a lot on social media at Prof. Joyce Harper. You'll find lots of information about what I do on my website. And it's been great that some of you have put questions already in the chat. I know we've only got about 10 minutes left. So I'll stop there, and then we can have a look at the questions. Shall I have a look at these questions in the chat?
I will show you all of them. Just wanted to say huge thanks for your amazing work for sure, and also for this amazing presentation. And thank you everyone for being active here. And of course, let's go ahead with some of the questions. You have answered some of them, but there are some more that we can still answer. So let's have a look. Okay, let me just have a.
And apologies, I had a teenager in and out of the room.
It's fine. It happens. As you said, it's the end of the exams, so we cannot blame them.
Off the table and I'm fiddling around. I was like,
it's perfectly,
but I'm used to it.
It's not a problem. All right, so I will have a look at this question here. Okay, so I'm not sure if you answered. I don't think so. So does going through IVF for repeated rounds reduce best eggs as a time in rounds?
Yeah, I did answer that one.
Yeah, so, sorry.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah, there's I wish we knew how we could be sure we had the best eggs, but we don't. We really don't. So it doesn't. We're not reducing the best eggs by going through IVF. There's no evidence for that at all. And we couldn't think of any reason why, for sure.
All right, thank you. Let's have a look. We have this question. I'm 47, AMH 1.87, AFC 15, FSH 10.1. Am I doomed because of my age, or are my numbers not sure here?
Ronnie's singing. This is really tricky. I would, as I said, I'm not a medic and I'd hate to give medical advice, but unfortunately it is really difficult to get pregnant at 47. But by IVF, the chances are very, very low. I've asked many IVF units if they got anyone pregnant over the age of 45 with their own eggs. And I have never had a positive response. The HFEA data does say that there were a few people that got pregnant at 46 in a clinic, but I'm I've never met a clinic that's said that. So I don't know if that's just some inaccurate data entry. Naturally, there are people who have got pregnant at 47. I always feel that IVF's a bit trickier, more than natural conception at the sort of middle 40 ages. I think the eggs, if you've got some eggs there that are good, I think that I don't know, this is just a feeling I've always had, that they seem to be better naturally rather than sort of putting them under the stress of the IVF lab. A very rough idea, which we sometimes say, is to ask your mother what age she was when she went through the menopause. It doesn't always work. And I do have the feeling that we're seeing some changes. So, for example, people that smoke go through the menopause earlier. And I think there are some other issues going on now. But certainly historically, we used to go through the menopause a similar age to our mother. So there are some women that go through the menopause at 60. I'm 59, and I've got a few friends in their mid 50s who are still having periods. So they would have been fertile still at 45 to 47 for sure. So I wish you lots of luck. I hope it can work. But there are other things you need to look at. So I'm sure, hopefully, your health professionals giving you some really good advice there. Oh, have we glitched? Oh. Oh, can you hear me? Oh dear. Oh, you can hear me. Good. Yes, you can hear me. Good. I didn't know who had glitched. Okay, it's the other end that's glitched. Good. Okay, so God, I thought I was talking to myself. I'm glad you can still hear me. Good. Thank you so much, everyone. There was a question I wanted to. So hopefully the platform must still be all up and running. Something I wanted to answer about the vitamins. This is a really important one, and when I was writing the book, again, I read every paper, I listened to every webinar I could about vitamins, and I wished I could, find a magic pill that would really help people. Hi, can you? Yeah, it was you that glitched. They said they could still hear me, so I was carrying on.
That's good. Thank you so much. It's never happened to me, but
many times. I'm used
thank you.
But we're just talking about vitamins, and
Yes,
just saying,
perfect.
I read everything about vitamins, and there's a fantastic research group in the US that done amazing work on this, and I read everything and spoke to them. And so the most important thing is to have a healthy diet, and there's a lot of research about the Mediterranean diet, which is lots of fresh fruit and vegetables, not too much red meat, lots of fish, alcohol, smoking, eating fast food, eating convenience foods, those things, they definitely seem to have a negative effect. But regarding a specific vitamin, I think the important thing is to find out. I think you have to be very careful with vitamins. I originally did biochemistry, and we were taught you should always be very careful about vitamins. Some of them can be toxic. Some of them don't work with other vitamins. It's not just a case, I'll just take this big pill every day and it will make me great. Some vitamins you can overdose on. Some vitamins they'll go through your body and it'll be fine. So I think you have to be careful. Vitamin D is a big one. But with all of these, I think if you're worried, find out whether you're deficient. Go and get a test and find out what you're deficient in. We all seem to be deficient in vitamin D. I mean, at the moment in the UK, we've had so much sun. I'd be amazed if we're still deficient, but you never know. So I think it's really important to find out if you're deficient, but not just you and your partner. And this is what's really, really important. They talk about all these fertility tests for women, etc., etc. It's not one person makes a baby. It's, as I showed on the slide, it's two people. we have so much evidence now about the health of the man. It's really, really important, and that their health can have a long-term effect on not just our fertility, but also on the health of the future child. So it's both of us. It's not just us. So yeah, again, vitamin E, just check. I would find out whether you're deficient first. When I wrote the chapter about nutrition and well-being for my book, at one point it was a huge chapter. It was almost a book, another book. And I cut it down drastically, but I did have a lot to say about it. So I have written a chapter on nutrition and well-being. I think your sleep's important. I am a massive exercise fan, but we've just been doing a study on exercising during fertility treatment. There is a fine line. You don't want to exercise too much, and you don't want to exercise not at all. And what one person thinks, I mean, I normally exercise every day, but what I think's normal and the next person thinks normal exercise is not the same. So I think you have to be careful. I think if you're an elite athlete, you do need to think carefully. I'm sure you are aware that, super training, you can stop your periods by having too much training in sport. So we have to be careful. But yeah, again, just get advice about that. Can I just pick up a question? Someone said they've got PTSD from undergoing IVF. Are there any useful resources to overcome trauma? I can tell you, I've had counselling. I think many of us have PTSD after IVF, whether we have a child from it or not. I get upset a lot seeing people. I have a lot of emotions. I've done a lot of work with Jessica Hepburn, who's and she's involved with the arts, and we've done a lot about looking at people's art around both theatrical and still art around fertility and infertility, and they all bring me to tears. And it's not just tears. There is trauma. There is trauma for sure. Now, I do know one of my long-term friends who I used to work with 30 years ago, again, been through all of this. I know that she's now doing counselling for PTSD. So it's certainly something that people have recognised. So, yeah, please look around from whatever country you're in. There should be people that have recognized this. We did a survey of people that hadn't had children who had wanted to. We've done surveys on men and women, and the main reason people stop fertility treatment is emotional. It's very, very hard to go through the treatment, but I think even if you don't have the treatment, just the whole issue of infertility, there's so much there. So I'm totally with you and totally understand your question. And yeah, please look around and try and find someone who you can discuss this with, and hopefully can help you and support you. But I've had 2 sessions of counselling just for this, and how I felt about it. It's certainly there for, you're not alone for sure.
That's for sure. Thank you so much also for sharing here. Okay, let's have a look. Salma has a question for you as well. Have donor eggs after stimulation at collection from a young donor the same quality, or there are some that are not of good quality?
Okay, so all egg donors should be under 35 years. And so under 35, the majority of eggs should be hopefully of good quality. It's after, and these numbers are really generalizing. So there will be some people for sure who don't have good quality eggs. And we can't tell that from, unfortunately, just looking at the egg. So just as for us, there are some of us that go through IVF at under 35 and we can't get pregnant. And it's probably because our eggs are not as good. I mean, those graphs are showing you sort of big numbers, but there will definitely be people in their 20s or even younger who don't have good eggs. So just as it could happen to someone who's not a donor, it can happen to someone who is a donor. So yes, it can happen. This under 35 is a very sort of rough thought that they should be good eggs, but there's no guarantee. They could certainly not be good. I've heard of egg donor cycles where there was no fertilization and the sperm had fertilized before. So it wasn't the sperm, it was the egg. So it certainly can happen.
All right. Thank you so much indeed, Selma, for yet another question, and of course for your help with the question. There's a thank you from Selma for you right here. And we will go back to the topic about periods. Yes, you asked that, and M has added, why do some periods hurt more than others?
We are just all different. We are, so I'm not sure if that means within the same person on different months. We are such individuals where things can vary, how we're feeling, how one body will tolerate pain and how the next will, doesn't make it any, less meaningful. It's just there's so many factors. Again, how we're feeling. I'm sure you're aware, when you're feeling tired, everything seems worse and harder. So yeah, what makes periods hurt more than others? I wish I knew the answer. What I really feel, I'm sure many of your listeners will agree, we have not done enough research around women's health. We have huge areas. I mean, to ask this question in schools about how young girls felt about their periods and see the response. I'm still trying to find an hour to sit down and analyze the 250 comments and count them up. But I think there were, there were so many that wrote that they were having problems. I think we need to do some research. There may be some papers out there. I try to keep up with everything, but I cover a wide different area of topics. But I don't know when we last asked women about their periods and really delved into it. And so I think that's a really important piece of research I want to get involved with to find out. And I don't know if your audience, I think, feel free to write in the chat. I think we grin and bear things too much as women. And I've got friends, especially people going through the menopause, they just bleed continuously. Actually, one of the girls in one of the schools said she'd had a period for 7 months. She was 16 and she'd had a period for 7 months. I mean, that's just, can you imagine how that could be? But going through the menopause, I know women that have basically almost the whole time they're on a period, which seriously affects our life. And we're dealing with these things that men don't have to deal with. And I think we need to address this urgently. And there's so much important work. And we're very lucky in the UK. The UK government have launched a women's health initiative. And they are now, one of the things is to listen to women, to ask them what issues they have around their health, which is fantastic news. So things are really going to change. But it's so important. This is why all my research now, I was a lab scientist for 25 years, but all my research now is asking people how they feel about things. What's their attitude? What do they understand? And see how we can help educate them. That's really where I want everything to be now, because we have got a big gap. And I feel terrible. I said I started writing my book in 1987. And I think how much I could have done in those years if I hadn't have done my lab work. I mean, I did important lab work, but I just think, wow, if I was doing now, but the time's got to be right. But if I was doing what I'm doing now 30 years ago, anyway, better late than never. We'll catch up.
That's true. That's true. But you did it in the end, right? So that's what counts for sure. And thank you so much indeed for that. And I'm just looking here. There's, I think, one more question. I don't think it was asked yet from Fran. Does IVF ICSI in some way bypass the natural chromosome miscarriages, so that there are more births of babies with chromosome-related problems or diseases?
Excellent question. And I've had this many times before. There's no data. Now, people have followed and looked at the births from IVF and ICSI for many, many years. There's a fabulous team in Belgium who have been following these from the 90s, and there is no evidence that there are more babies with chromosome abnormalities. So it seems, it's a really good question. I can tell that they understand this, because there is a thought that you could maybe more of the embryos are implanting that the womb would normally reject, but there is no data, and people do look at this all the time. They look at it with frozen embryos, they look at it with biopsied embryos. It's really, really important to monitor the children that we're creating through these treatments, and to check that everything's okay. So no, doesn't seem to be any difference in any of the data.
All right, thank you so much for the clarification and your question. Indeed, someone is typing. Let's have a look. Let's make sure that we answer all of your questions. And just to make sure, I'm not sure if you answered that one. Does painful period mean I have endometriosis or not?
Yeah, I did. I just said that it doesn't necessarily, but they please must go and get things checked.
Yep. Yeah, that's for sure. Thank you so much indeed. And let's have a look. In the meantime, we did receive one more question. You've made me well, it's a comment, but thank you so much. Relax about this. As godmother of IVF ICSI twins, one did have chromosome related disease. Okay, thank you.
So I have 3 IVF children. One who was just going out. I have IVF twins who are from frozen embryo transfer, and I have a 19-year-old. And yeah, there's always the worry, but chromosome abnormalities can happen. It's highly unlikely it be the IVF and ICSI.
There's a question if you can help with that. Yeah, so if you can share with us, did you use your own eggs?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But sure. Years and nightmares and pain and trauma. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you also for that. Well, I think that was our final question, but I'm sure that if you wish to get some more questions, ask more questions, you can find Joyce on Instagram, or you can follow her, and you can just simply go to her website, and I'm sure you will find lots and lots of useful information. Thank you everyone for this brilliant session, for being active here, and for your questions. I hope that it was useful. I do believe that was useful for you. And I think that we definitely should be talking about those topics like fertility. This is something that we still should talk about. As you said, it's something that has not been researched thoroughly, although we think that it's, we know everything. I think that most of us think that it's, already researched enough, but it turns out it's not. So thank you for being here tonight. And Joyce, anything else you would like to add before we finish?
No, just thanks everyone. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for the interaction. It really, I love it. I don't want to talk at people. I want to talk with people. So obviously remotely has advantages, but disadvantages because we're not in the same room. But so thank you so much for interacting. It's really important for me, and it's really great for me to hear your questions. And sure. I wish you every luck. I'm sure for some of you might have known everything, but you may have thought, I wish I knew that 20 years ago.
Of course.
But the reassurance will be that we're working on it. I'm going into schools. We're helping other countries as well. And, hopefully we will readdress this. And these are things that everyone will know for as long as they can remember. So it'll be really great.
Perfect. Exactly. That's the perfect ending. So thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, everyone. You know that we will be back on Tuesday, so I hope you will be able to join us. There are some questions that you still have, I'm sure, so don't hesitate and sign up for our next webinar. Joyce, it was great to have you here. Thank you so much, and also have a great evening, and I hope that we'll be able to have some more events coming up with you. So thanks a lot and take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.